long way to go and a short time to get there. So scooch in. Here we go. We're going to go ahead and open with a hearing on HB 2443. This was the bill we were going to hear yesterday, but unfortunately we got carried away on the floor, and it cost us quite a bit of time. And so we're going to get a brief bill description on this, and I had everybody review the testimony last night, and we're going to only accept written testimony on that. My intent is to try to work this bill today as well. So with that, I'm going to open the hearing, and we'll get a brief bill description from Charles Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2443 provides a preference for employment and promotion in the state government of Kansas for qualified persons with disabilities, with or without a reasonable accommodation, if they're qualified and meet the performance standards of the position. There are definitions for state government. It's basically applies to departments, bureaus, divisions, boards, authorities, agencies, commissions, or institutions of the state, not the judicial and legislative branches, and not public political subdivisions of the state. The bill provides that job openings and notices from the state are to indicate that the job is subject to the disability preference, and explain how applicants with disabilities can take advantage of that. Applicants do need to provide documentation of their disability. The state government hiring authority is to offer an interview to a person who is disabled and has applied for the open position if they meet the performance standards of the position, and they've presented proof of disability. Disabled persons under this bill would also have a preference, a retention preference in the event of layoffs. That's in the middle of page 2, subsection E. There is a provision pertaining to their rights not to disclose their disability at the time of hire if they wish, but if they wish to obtain advantage of the retention preference, they do need to do so before layoffs are announced. There are a number of exceptions on the bottom of page 2. These provisions will not apply to positions that are filled by elected officers or vacancies in elected offices. And there's a list of other exceptions there on the bottom of page 2, lines 37 to 43. And also on the top of page 3, lines 1 to 2, a number of exceptions. And with that, that's what the bill does, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
You or Eddie could answer this. I believe this is similar in nature to an executive order that has been in place for the 2 previous administrations and is currently in place. Is that correct?
Chairman, I apologize. I have not had an opportunity to review that executive order. Perhaps Eddie has and could answer that.
Eddie, would you be able to answer that? I'm sorry, I just sprung it on you.
No, Mr. Chair, I also have not had a chance to review those executive orders, so I can't speak to that either. Sorry.
Okay, any questions for the reviser on this bill? Okay. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can an employer ask for proof of disability? I see it's in the bill. I just didn't know if by federal law you could.
Oh, under federal law? Yeah, that's a good question, Representative. Under the bill, persons have the right to not disclose their disability. So this is the way the bill is set up. An applicant who's disabled has that option to provide documentation of their disability and receive the preference, but it's just an option to do so.
Any of our attorneys want to chime in on that? Nope. Representative Williams.
I think this is a good bill, and I would not support it. However, if a person said they were disabled and they didn't have to show proof of it, and because the Disability Act, it just seems to me that you could, I don't know. if you don't have to show proof of it, then I just see that it'd be potentially problematic. But it is what it is. Thank you.
So Representative, I believe that you have to show proof in order to be considered as disability. So before you're considered, you have to provide the proof. Well, I'll call up one of the conferees to try to clear that up after we're done with Charles. Any other questions for Charles? Okay, seeing none. Mike Burgess, could you come up and answer that last question?
I'll do my best. Mike Burgess with the Disability Rights Center of Kansas. And so I believe the way the bill works is if an individual wants to utilize the provisions in the bill to receive preference, then the employer, then they have to provide that proof in that. But they're not, unless they want to use the provisions of the bill, they don't, it's totally voluntarily to disclose. But if they do disclose to access the bill, they have to show proof. You can require that. And so that we do that for waiver programs and other things too, where somebody, if they want to access a service that has a requirement, they have to meet those requirements.
Representative Williams.
Okay, so it wouldn't violate the American Disabilities Act?
It's voluntarily. So the employer is not requiring them to disclose anything.
But if the employer says, I have this position for you, you're equally qualified as one of your peers, but you will have to disclose that, could that be a problem?
So,
Okay, I don't think.
if they, because
Right.
it would be up to that individual. If they wouldn't be considered, the only way they would be considered is if they, when they're applying for the job, I believe the IT system, the state portal will have like a checkbox. So if they choose to disclose their disability to access this new preference, they do so, and then they would, then there would be some follow-up, obviously, through the Department of Administration to prove that. But then that, would guarantee them an interview is essentially what it boils down to. So.
Okay, all good, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions, we'll close that portion of the hearing. There are 5 proponents, no neutral and no opponents to this bill, and hopefully you've all reviewed that, and I will close the hearing on HB 2443. Committee, I'll call your attention to SB 124. It is the Star Bond bill. And we'll open that for discussion. Representative Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move we pass out SB 124, favorable for passage.
Seconded by Representative Dodson. Committee, there was a series of amendments that were circulated. I believe you have all received those. In the interest of time, I had Charles send them to Cindy, at least the ones I was aware of that I was involved in. So she should have circulated those. If you don't have those, let me know. And we'll open. Oh, my gosh, I was remiss. I forgot to welcome Representative Owens to our committee today. He's substituting in for Kyle Hoffman. Big shoes to fill there. So, any discussion on the bill? Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment, and I believe Charles labeled this as the Highland Amendment, conflict of interest, corporate headquarters sales tax amount.
You want to go ahead and explain your amendment, or do you want Charles to do it for you?
Charles, go ahead, please, and then we'll go from there.
Charles, could you explain the Highland Amendment, please?
Chairman, members of the committee, the Highland Amendment, if you look at the first page, it addresses that provision that was added by the Senate Committee of the Whole regarding conflict of interest, and it modifies that by removing that what was language on lines 13 and 14, benefit financially either directly or indirectly, as I think the committee discussion observed was somewhat broad language, and replaces it with what you see in the balloon. in the box, that no state or local government officials shall be employed by a star bond project developer or manager. And for purposes of the section, employed means direct employment or work as an independent contractor for the project developer or manager. The rest of that addition stays the same. The state or local government official, the definition, which is a broad definition, stays in the bill. Turning to page 2, there's just a kind of a clarification or maybe just substitution of some better language that you see at the top of the page there. Just a reference to, when work, the definition of when work is started. It replaces some language there and adds according to an approved plan of construction instead of the language that you see on lines 2 and 3 of page 2. The second significant addition with this amendment is in the middle there of page 2, lines 30, 32. You'll see that we're adding language that requires that the addition, the major business facility, which is an addition of a potential project under this bill, the amendment requires that the major business facility is to meet sales tax increment revenue requirements established by the secretary, and those requirements have to be independent of any associated retail business located in or to be developed within the Star Bond Project District pursuant to the Star Bond Project Plan. That is what this amendment does.
Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first part of that, because of the discussion we had in our committee about a public employee or a servant of the public making money, if their house went up, that would be considered money. So in this case, we just preclude that anybody from them be employed by any of these organizations. And I think that clears that up. That's my opinion. And the second page, just language there to make that more precise. They have to have a plan of construction. And then the last one, I had a little heartburn over this one, but if the secretary can come up with a plan to show that the sales tax is independent and not cannibalization, I will go along with it, and that's the reason for that one. And that is my amendment that I propose, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sutton, do you have a question? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not certain about the wording on the bottom of page 2 there. In that, I get the intent was to not cannibalize, and that I'm absolutely okay with. But with the second part of it there, independent of any associated retail businesses located in or to be developed, that part sounds like if you're drawing in new commercial business because of the Star Bond project, that wouldn't be included in the sales tax increase, and I really think it ought to be. Just my 2 cents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Highland.
I understand what you're saying. It's interpretation of the wording. I see it as you've got the big Star Bond project here, but within that corporate headquarters that's moving in, the increase in retail sales that they bring in, but you're saying maybe the word should be, they should be counted in there. If it's new, I accept that criticism.
So you want to strike the words then, or to be developed?
Or to be developed within, strike those words and it'll be located in the Star Bond district.
Okay, can I get a second on the amendment? Seconded by Representative Sutton. Charles, did you understand that change?
Yes, Chairman.
Any further discussion on this amendment? Okay, seeing none, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I close.
Committee, you've all heard the motion, seconded by Representative Sutton. All in favor say aye. Aye. All against say no. Motion passes. Further discussion on the bill? Representative Dodson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll let Charles go over these, but just to kind of introduce it, got 4 balloons, 2 on page 5, 1 on page 7, 1 on page 11. So the first 2, if you remember the discussion about metro areas and the possibility that OMB was going to create micropolitan areas. So in discussions with the Secretary's office, we wanted to make sure that we didn't have that confusion. So the number then matters. That is the 50,000 versus the 100,000. So you'll find both of those as Charles reads those. Then in the process section, where you have hearings in your municipality, where you conduct surveys, all of those kinds of things as these plans are being promulgated, there was no mention of gaining approval from the Secretary. So there's 2 process steps for that. One is on page 7, and another one is if there's a rejection and a reintroduction, that's on page 11. So with that, Charles, can you go ahead?
Certainly, Representative. So I think you've really covered it pretty well. I don't know that I have much to add. Page 5, you'll see that we're amending, as Representative Dodson indicated, the definition of rural development project, replacing the reference to the federal metropolitan statistical area with just with city with a population of more than 50,000. And with respect to projects, star bond projects in an urban area, we have that provision there that if the population is between 50 and 75,000, the Secretary has discretion to go ahead and do a project if it's deemed of high value by the Secretary, with a lesser amount of capital investment or projected gross annual sales than the current requirement, as in the bill, of 75 million of capital investment and 75 million of projected gross annual sales. So discretion to for lesser amounts if the project is deemed of high value by the Secretary. And then I think Representative Dodson covered the rest of it, just adding some language with respect to approval by the Secretary. On pages 11 and 7. Thank you. And that is what the amendment does.
Okay, so Representative Dodson had identified an issue where a city like Manhattan, which is just barely bigger than 50,000 people, wouldn't qualify for the rural area type deal because they're bigger than 50,000. But they would also be forced to have an investment of 75 million and sales of 75 million, which may not be able to be sustained. And we didn't want to eliminate, the mid-sized cities from this bill by raising the limit to 75 million. Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the concept here. The only problem I see is that we don't have any definition. A lesser amount of capital and project gross annual sales. It could be 0.
Representative Dodson.
It could be 0, but, we have to rely on the good judgment of the Secretary. And also, if you recall, when we put in here, when we put in here that we wanted to make sure that you had all of the economic supporting information to make the project reasonably economically viable, to include returns on investment and things like that. So, my own recollection is on when we did the downtown and included the Flint Hills Discovery Center, the Discovery Center by itself does not bring in that kind of money. But all of the attendant businesses that were included in that zone do, but it wouldn't have made 75 million. There's no question about that. So I mean, kind of speaking in general terms, when you look at a city of any size and you want to place something in there that you think can be an economic generator, the idea is that too big for the city? Is it too small to generate income? Does it make a reasonable allocation of the state's funds? So that's kind of what I was getting at, but really, it's really tough to put in a limit on that.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand that. I agree with it. I have some difficulty, not necessarily with relying on the good faith of our current secretary, but this relies on the good faith of every secretary from now on, because until we change the law again, which, you know, heck, it could be next year.
Let's hope it's not next year.
I would prefer not. I'm just wondering if we can't set some sort of minimum parameters in there, and I would check to wiser heads as far as guessing or speculating what would be an appropriate number. But I think both investment and annual sales are two things that need to be bottom defined somehow.
I would tend to agree with you. When I first saw the amendment, it left a lot to discretion, and we went back and forth on it, and that's why we put the 50 to 75,000 for the metropolitan area number. But we didn't address the floor, and the previous floor was 50 million, I believe. Would that be acceptable, Representative Dodson? We don't have a second on your amendment yet.
Is that what you would? So we're talking about just cutting it in half to 50 million.
Half of 75, 38 million.
38.
40 million? Do I hear 40 million? Sold.
All right, so
Okay, seconded by Representative Highland. Charles, did you get that change with a floor of not less than 40 million in sales and 40 million in investment?
Yes, Chairman.
Any discussion on that amendment? Yep, seeing none, Representative, you can close.
So with the amendment, I'd close.
Committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Highland. All in favor say aye. All against say no. Motion passes. Thank you. Further discussion on the bill? Representative Williams.
Mr. Chair, if everyone would draw their attention to the Balloon-Williams Amendment. And Charles, if you'll just be on standby in case I miss anything, that'd be great. On the Balloon Amendment, there are some key ideas, and I will point you to what page they are on, but they're all transparency related. Yeah, they're all transparency related. Thank you. The first one is all Star Bonds projects must report per statute to the transparency database. So if you flip to page 15, you could find reference to the transparency database that would be on the Secretary's website, which would be the Department of Commerce website. That database was established several years ago, and though it's not updated yet with current Star Bonds projects, it will be henceforth. And so we want to make sure that that is just affirmed in what we're doing today. Another item that's transparency related is all counties or cities must provide a visible website link to this transparency database. We want our constituents to know that this transparency database exists. And so that's also on the same page. So it's pretty easy to incorporate that. Another item is all developers and associated business partners must include their names of individual officers, persons, in addition to the fact that they may be an LLC. And what happens is oftentimes that LLC name, you'd have to go search it on the Secretary of State website to find out what it is. It is already required to be included on the transparency database. So now we understand who is involved every step of the project by name, personal name, not just business name. That's on page 2 and on page 8. You want to check that out. On page 9 and 10, another transparency item relates to hearings. Per Kansas Open Meetings Act, you have to place that in a, you have to put that in a newspaper. Well, we're also moving in time and technology, and so we think it would be appropriate to put it on your website, if you have a website, so that your constituents have better access to that information. Next item, you could look on page 7. I think that's 17. Let me see. Page 7. If you look on page 7, it says insert attachment A. Then you have to go to attachment A, and it looks like a lot, but it's really not. It was just renumbered. Thank you, Charles. And on this page, let's see, it's all those documents and reports and the resolution and all those things that are commonplace that you could get by open records request, they should just automatically be on the website, not difficult for constituents or stakeholders to find. So after that hearing and that resolution's passed, then those documents would be included. And finally, the last and maybe the most important disclosure item is also found on, it's on page 17. So turn to page 17. And this is the transfer of land. So oftentimes in a star bond project over a series of years, the property or pieces or parcels are sold off to other people. Every time that transfer of property is made, we just ask for transparency. So the individual's names, not just the LLC, but every time we have record of that. And so that would be included on all the appropriate documents. Charles, did I miss anything?
No, Representative, I think you covered it.
I'll stand for questions.
Representative Highland?
When you first started speaking, you mentioned newspapers, and I did not find that anywhere.
It doesn't mention newspapers, it mentions a statute. So it says they must comply with the existing statutes. We're not changing existing statutes. I don't want to get into that. I see, as a former local government chair, that's out of my purview. I don't want to touch it. I'm just saying, in addition to what is required by state statute, they also need to put it on their website, because we're asking for all kinds of other documentation on their website. So, and of course, it's if they have a website. If they do not have a website, which is doubtful, they would be exempt.
Mr. Chairman?
And I don't know if I have a second.
We don't have a second. Representative Anderson, did you want to second that amendment? Okay. Seconded by Representative Anderson.
You really liked it.
Wake up.
When you're on.
Any discussion on the amendment? Representative Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question on the last balloon Representative was speaking to on page 17. I'm just curious, I understand the disclosures in reference to transparency with continuing to identify who the transferees are and such. I'm curious about the disclosure of the sale price and what we're trying to do there with disclosing a sale price.
Again, that's about transparency. You're using tax-funded dollars, sales tax dollars, to purchase bonds in which you're selling property. And if you're going to do that, then I think disclosing those transactions is part and parcel to the entire process. And I don't think we had pushback on that from developers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think the sales prices are generally public information anyway. Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, Representative, you may close.
I close.
Committee, you've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Anderson. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Motion passes. Further discussion on the bill, Representative Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think I've got my note late to Charles about my amendments looked good, and so I don't think it's been distributed yet. So if the reviser could distribute my first amendment.
Charles, could you go ahead and send that to Cindy, and Cindy can get it to the committee? While we're waiting on that, Charles, I want to make sure we were clear on the Dodson Amendment, that the floor of $40 million and $40 million in investment and sales only applies to cities between 50 and 75,000, metropolitan areas between 50 and 75,000. Could you make sure that that's how that is written?
Yes, Chairman, I will do so.
Okay, thank you. Everybody have the amendment? We're still waiting on the amendment from Charles.
Do you want?
Go ahead and you can go ahead and explain it, Representative Curtis.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I can go ahead and start explaining it, and then Charles can fill in. So much like Representative Dodson was trying to assist those mid-sized cities, of course I am trying to assist those very economically distressed areas in our urban core. So as we know, STAR bonds only work for tourism areas if you generate retail sales. By moving the amount to so high, we can really only advance tourism projects that will have big box retailers as part of the project. In today's retail market, we do not yet know how consumer habits will change and what the future of retail is. With Amazon, COVID, new delivery methods on the horizon, it may be even more challenging to bring traditional retail. The STAR bond bill in its current form will prevent older urban areas from ever getting STAR bonds, and it will make it extremely challenging for our suburban areas. It's a policy shift, one that will hopefully make it possible for some of our rural areas and small cities to benefit. I read a recent article about how Augusta has set a goal to become a destination, much like Eureka Springs, which is very exciting. This speaks to my amendment. If the goal is to prompt economic development in the most economically distressed areas of our state, then why do we separate out urban from rural? Why do we not adopt criteria that align state policy and incentives so that we are providing resources to the most challenging economic areas in our state? They share many of the same issues: lack of housing, low household income, access to jobs, public transportation, grocery stores, medical facilities, childcare, not to mention broadband, which is still an issue in both our urban and rural communities. Some of those issues are statewide, but all of those issues are even more challenging in our most economically distressed areas, whether they are urban or rural, or whether they're in a big city or a small city. So this amendment that I'm offering would align those areas that are most economically distressed in our state to meet the same threshold for STAR bond projects. And hopefully everybody has a copy of the amendment at this point. Okay, good. And
Go ahead.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I don't know if the reviser would have anything to add to clarify what this amendment does to what I've said.
Charles, do you have anything to add?
No, just that there, if you look on page 5 of the amendment, that's where the language is. This is in reference to urban STAR bond projects. And the language is located within a qualified census tract with a capital investment of at least $3 million, will enhance the quality of life in the community. And you'll see that is similar, of course, to the provisions for the rural redevelopment projects just higher up there on page 5.
We do have examples in our statutes already where this has been done, where we've tied these policies to economic data versus geographic. And I can provide that information for anybody who wants it. The other thing that I want to mention real quickly is that there is what is called the American Community Survey, which is based off U.S. Census data, and you can identify economically distressed areas in that mapping process. You can also lower the household threshold so that you really get to those areas that are most challenging. Like in Wyandotte County, that would be east of 635. So you really do get to those areas by defining that data. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I think Representative Hsu, you wanted to second the amendment. Okay, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing the amendment. As much as I would like to support it, I cannot, but I do want to ask you some questions. How many star bond districts exist in your county?
Oh my gosh, you would ask me that. I'm not sure. I would have to think about that. Okay. But there are several.
Right, there are several. And so Wyandotte, the county, there may be areas that don't have lots of development. They may be distressed area, but they do benefit overall in any type of sales tax revenue or economic development, tourism, because of those existing star bonds that are in your county. And I think you do have quite a few.
That is true and not true, because at the same time our county was about to realize the benefit from the star bonds, the state took away our machinery and equipment tax. They also stopped funding ad valorem. So we had to use our star bond revenue that we thought the eastern portion of our county would benefit from to fill that state hole.
Well, I appreciate that. And as a former mayor, I remember when that machinery tax was taken away, and it impacted every city, not just those that are in Wyandotte. And so I don't see it necessarily relevant to this discussion here. But I wanted to just bring into light that Wyandotte County, as well as all of our communities, have many tools that are at their disposal locally that help for lower capital investment projects. So you could have community improvement districts, tax increment finance districts, you can do property tax abatements, there's revitalization districts for distressed areas. I know that's a very popular tool, and I do believe that if we lower the star bonds criteria to 3 million, that's going to have implications to our rural communities that have now, we just passed out 40 million, and that's going to have implications for developers as they use this tool, because the tool will eventually struggle. It's not designed for that, but there are other types of tools that are designed for that. And I'm so glad that we do have those tools at our disposal. So I will be opposing this amendment. Thank you.
I appreciate that, but I totally disagree, because these are funds that we attract through a star bond district that are not currently part of our revenue. This is outside fund, this is new funding that comes to our state. And the reason I'm fighting so hard is that we have, in the area that I'm speaking of, 2 of the most historical districts in our state. We have Call Point, where Lewis and Clark camped. If you follow the river on up around the bend, you have Quindaro Ruins, which is the true underground railroad. Those are potential star bond projects. That is an area where we could attract the activity that's happening across the river in Kansas City, Missouri, as visitors come to our city to then come across the river and spend some of those dollars in Kansas. And so that is why I'm fighting so hard to make sure that we do not eliminate this very powerful tool that we have in Kansas that the surrounding states don't have. And Wyandotte County has been very successful with their star bond projects. I mean, our star bond projects are ones that have brought revenue to our state and to our county. So I respectfully disagree.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, committee, you usually hear me talking quite a bit about Johnson County and how Johnson County is the economic engine of the state. But The fact of the matter is that the Kansas City metro area is an area that generates or has the potential to generate a great deal of revenue for the state. And as the carrier of the amendment stated, this opportunity that we have with this unique tool that we have that allows us to compete with Missouri is essential, especially in my mind, because we don't really have a very strong Johnson County without a strong Wyandotte County. And so I stand in strong support of this as a member of the Kansas City Metro delegation, because I always conduct myself, especially when it comes to economic development tools, with Missouri in mind and with competition with Missouri in mind. And so I strongly urge your support here, and I know I've got other members of the Johnson County delegation on this committee, to really think about this from this standpoint, because Wyandotte County has been the gold standard of success in star bonds, and I do think we have a tremendous opportunity here. So I, again, urge your support and want you to consider that from a metro area growth and from the standpoint of competing with Missouri, which is a slave state, and we're better. So we should just win. This is a good opportunity.
Okay, so there's that. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would support this. Looking through this, it seems like we've gone to some pain to try to make sure we've carved out something that would work for mid-sized cities. We've worked something out that would work for rural development, and it seems that it would be a little bit irresponsible to leave one segment of potential development out of this tool. So I support this, and I would encourage everyone else to as well.
All right, so Representative, when you first brought this to me, it was, I realized there's a need there. I did meet with some of the people that use the star bonds, and I've met with I've included you in some of this, but the Department of Commerce as well. And, you know, what we're trying to do with this bill is rein in the star bonds and the abuse that some of us have perceived. It also collects a lot of good data so that we can make good decisions in the future. The star bonds entire subject is at risk. There could be a day soon, especially when this data starts to roll in, that the legislature decides to get rid of star bonds completely. And rather than put star bonds in jeopardy by keep continuing to carve things out, I believe the Department of Commerce has agreed. So this particular amendment, I think, would have been better brought on the floor tomorrow when we hear the rural development bill, because it would fit very well for what I know Kansas City, Kansas is. I approached the Department of Commerce and they didn't want to make that change, but I believe they have agreed to allow a bill to come, and they would support you in that. Representative David Sofer, could you speak to that? I believe this is a good idea. I don't know that it belongs in the star bond bill.
I totally understand, Mr. Chairman. So, and I know it's a new concept, and so it may take a while for people to kind of get warm to the idea, but I appreciate that.
David Sofer.
Sure. David Sofer, Legislative Policy Director, Kansas Department of Commerce. That is correct. We have spoken with the representative, and we will gladly support a bill that addresses some of the needs in those most distressed areas, whether it be housing, economic development, kind of everything as a whole. There is a need there. It is important that we make sure that economic development doesn't just go to the continuous, same areas, but also addresses a lot of those needs areas that are distressed. At the same point in time, we also had a conversation with the senator from Wyandotte as well. And we have committed to getting the lieutenant governor to the district to have that honest conversation with the community about what we can do to best address their needs, and working together with the community as a whole on how we can best address what they're seeking and what they need most. And I'll be honest, until we have that conversation, until we all work together, Any bill we do may not necessarily succeed. We've got to get the community on board, and part of that involves us being able to outreach and have that honest conversation with them. So that is our goal. We will have something next year, and we will be supportive of the representative's efforts.
So for the record, you agree that it's a good idea, you agree that you'll go visit the community before next session, and you'll agree that you will help concoct and support a bill for the rural areas?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Is that good enough for you, Representative?
That satisfies me. Thank you very much. I appreciate the effort.
Would you care to withdraw your amendment?
Yes, sir, I would withdraw my amendment.
In Representative Shu, is that all right with you? Okay. Thanks for the discussion. Any further discussion? Representative Carpenter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Committee, I have an amendment. It'll be in your computer as the Hoffman Amendment. This basically deals with the layering or the disclosure of all tax incentives, state, federal, and local. And it also deals with the tracking of visitors to make sure that that is accurate. So with that, Charles, as a backup, I'll start page 5 page 1, line 5, after study requirements, insert disclosure of state, federal, and local tax incentives within star bond districts. Line 7, add statute number 121765. Moving on down. To page 2. Line 32, add after new visitors to Kansas, add and that has agreed to provide visitor tracking data to the Secretary as requested by the Secretary, including but not limited to resident zip code information to be provided and held by the Secretary without personal identifying information. Moving on down. Page 7. On line 41, insert such plan shall include but not be limited to obtaining and reporting visitors' residence zip codes data to the Secretary. All businesses located in the Star Bonds district shall provide visitor residence data requested by the Secretary. Any such data shall be provided in an aggregate manner without personal identifying information. Page 8, line 23, we would add and then we would add a full disclosure and description of all state, federal, and local tax incentives that apply or pursuant to the project plan or anticipated to apply within the Star Bonds project district, or that apply to any business located in or pursuant to the project plan, which will be located in the district. Moving on down. Page 10, line 3, after plan, the presentation shall include a discussion of the feasibility study, including a description of all state, federal, and local tax incentives that apply within the Star Bonds project district and are anticipated to apply within the district pursuant to the project plan, or to any business located in the district or that will be located in the district pursuant to the project plan. page 15, line 12, insert the gross annual sales and gross annual sales projected pursuant to the Star Bonds project plan and feasibility study, and gross annual sales required to meet bond debt services requirements and other expenses, and then the amount of sales tax collected and the amount of any base sales tax being allocated to the district. Further down, line 28, the end of project and description of the data gathered pursuant to the visitor's tracking plan, including and not limited to zip code residence information. On down to line 37. It would be D, the report pursuant to subsection C, 1 and 2 shall include a description of all state, federal, and local tax incentives that apply within the Star Bonds project district or to any business located in that district. And line 17 just adds the statute 121765. I believe that finishes the amendment. That's my amendment, committee.
Charles, he pretty much went through the whole thing, but did you want to add anything to that?
Chairman, I would just add that.
Go ahead, Charles.
I'm sorry, Chairman, I would just add that the attachment A at the way back end of the amendment basically is the changes that would occur to the added statute 1217-165. You can see that we are adding, and that statute pertains to the hearing on the Star Bond project district. And so consistent with the rest of the amendment, we are adding a requirement that description of state, federal, and local tax incentives be part of that hearing. And in addition, when it's in the resolution that is passed at the end of the hearing that establishes the Star Bond project district, that a description of those state, federal, and local tax incentives be included in that as well. So you can see those changes on the attachment A at the back of the bill.
Okay, so just a little bit more transparency, and then the tracking that we asked about wasn't really spelled out, and I believe that's what this ends up doing. Is there any discussion on the amendment? We have a second on the amendment. Representative Sutton, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do, and I think this would probably, either I'm reading incorrectly or this is probably something that would have gotten cleaned up. But in the very first balloon, or I think it was the first balloon, yeah, on page 2, but not limited to residence zip code information to be provided, I would think that rather than or, we need and there. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, unless I'm just reading it incorrectly.
Charles.
So the reason that there's an or there is, and certainly subject to change, the reason there's an or there is it's or sort of means and or, right? So it's the information is to be provided either by the business without personal identifying information, or if for some reason, information just comes along with it, it has to be held by the secretary without personal identifying information. But the provided pertains to, of course, the major business facility. That has to agree to do that. So the major business facility has to provide that data, and then of course it's held by the secretary.
Okay, that works for me. Excellent. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a question along the same lines in relation to the reporting of visitor residence zip code data. It appears to state that all businesses located in the Star Bond District shall provide that data. is that really the intention? Is every business located within that entire district has to make some provision of reporting zip code data of every person that walked into their store? I had always envisioned it was more like the attraction or such that you were trying to get to, but are we talking about every business here?
Yes, sir, because those businesses are what pay the bonds off with their sales tax. And it's as simple as when you go into a store and you're getting ready to make a purchase, they have you type in your zip code into the credit card machine before you either pay by cash or credit card. That way they can track where the visitor came from, and then it also helps you track cannibalization. So if a bunch of the star bond, it'll help us collect the data, the proper data, to make future decisions. So if you're drawing from around the area only and using those funds to pay for the star bonds, we want to know that versus actually bringing in people from out of state, and then they make purchases in that same area.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understood the process, and yes, it's the sales tax that is paying off the bonds, not the businesses. But I just wanted to make sure that we grasped how much data we were actually asking and how many different places we were asking to gather and transmit that data in some fashion to the state. I mean, will each of those businesses be required on their own to make that reporting, or is there going to be some central place that will gather that data and then be responsible on behalf of the district to provide it to the state?
You know, I'm not quite sure how it works, but I do know that I have been to many places that you have to type in your zip code. A lot of stores do it on their own just to track where people come from and track their advertising. But I'm not quite sure how that'll work out. That would be up to the secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to echo some of the concerns of the previous speaker, I think about how incredibly annoying it is to, every time I'm shopping, to have to be asked to provide that information. And while I think it is important to track this, I do want us to at least consider the privacy of consumers, and also to think about just exactly, again, logistically, how does this work? Are we putting an extra burden on those businesses? Which staff members are going to have to do this, and exactly logistically how we do it? I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but a lot of times these extra layers of customer surveillance can at times either invade the privacy of consumers or cause an extra onus on businesses that might be less than ideal.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe some of that's true, but these businesses are also benefiting the rewards of being in a star bond area. So everything's not free like that. So I have faith in the department that they'll be able to do something that's not as much of a problem as we might think, but how hard is it to collect a 5-digit zip code?
Representative Clayton. Representative Clayton.
Thank you. And I guess I would counter that to saying that I should have run an amendment on this when we did our big tax bill yesterday, that perhaps we should start tracking the jobs created by some of the legislation we will be asked to vote on that will give amazingly large tax incentives to many groups. We don't ask those businesses to pay for things or to pay for these types of benefits. And so maybe we can look at that as a floor amendment when we see, I believe it's Senate Bill 50 now, hit the floor. Because if anyone gets any kind of a benefit, then perhaps we should increase the surveillance on all of those businesses, because it's not exactly fair if we're asking for these businesses to pay for their benefits, but not all of them.
Mr. Chairman. Representative, you want me to help you write that amendment?
Yes, I do. I always love bipartisanship. I think it would be fun.
Very good. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just add that the Star Bond is about tourism, and the whole premise behind it is bringing in out-of-state tourism. And if that is the whole premise, and that's the thing that holds this together, then we need to be assured that we truly are pulling in out-of-state visitors. And an example of cumbersome would be the Affordable Airfares Project in Wichita, When we once had the Affordable Airfares Project, that was a line item on the Kansas budget every single year for $5 million. They had to go out every quarter or every month and count license tags to find out how many people, where were the customers that were flying out of the Wichita airport going to. And they did that for $5 million for many, many, many years. It was cumbersome. It was tedious. There we go. And, but you know what? They did it and got a benefit. And so I say that it's not difficult with technology to do that, and I'm sure the Secretary of Commerce can figure out a way to make it workable. And so I just want to make that comment. Thank you.
Representative Probst.
I guess I have some concerns about this, and I think there is a distinction between when I go somewhere and I buy something and I punch in my zip code and they use that, the company uses that internally for its own marketing purposes. I think that can be done. We all know that. I think the hang-up is the logistics of taking this from who knows how many different businesses, requiring each of them to do this, and then I guess running this through a clearinghouse, which would presumably be the Department of Commerce. I know that the travel industry has some pretty good tools that can track movements of where people come in to visit places. I'm wondering why we're not relying on a tool like that and instead creating this onus burden on businesses to report their internal sales data and visitor data to the state of Kansas.
Representative Burrows.
Chairman, I would be remiss if I didn't make comment in reference to the Star Bonds project wouldn't happen without the hook. The main project that is being proposed for the development, whether it be the tourist attraction itself. The ancillary retail is what comes because of the hook. So if you want that data or the out-of-state tourism, it's not the small retail businesses that come in that are going to be making up the retail part. It's the hook itself, the main development that is going to be the impetus for the continued build-out of Star Bonds. That's the best way I can describe it. I know if you have 3 or 4 different restaurants that are in a Star Bonds project, chances are it's because they want to be close to that area, but they will be providing part of the retail dollars that'll go to pay off the Star Bonds. But they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the hook. And the hook is where you need your data to determine if that type of project, that particular tourist issue is really worth the investment.
Representative Carpenter, I'll come back to you here in a minute. Representative Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, the businesses are required to report this. Who gets in trouble if the customer refuses to give that information?
That's at the purview of the customer. They could also type in a zip code that they don't live in. There's no verification. It's just a question. And that's just one way to capture zip code data. Representative Probst mentioned another one. I don't know that it's specific. It doesn't say to use credit card machines or whatever, but it just wants to collect the data of the people that are drawn to the Star Bond district zip code data.
Sure, I understand that, but but that's for like marketing information. This is, as I understand it, the businesses have to provide zip code information to the state. And so I don't know if that shall language makes it super onerous if the customer does provide wrong information. That's my concern.
Representative Carpenter.
Hey, Mr. Chair. The more data we can gather on how successful these are, the better off they're going to be. I think it makes your case if you have that data that people came in from out of state, wherever they came from, and that you did create that traffic that we all talk about and that we may believe, but we may not have that proof. So I think this just makes a case for whether Star Bonds is, quite frankly, successful. So I think it's important. I don't know why you would argue that. The more that license or zip codes that you collect and the more traffic you've got, the better it looks. Star bonds, it makes them look better. So I just think it's a great idea.
Any further discussion? Representative Burrows.
Thank you. And I want to be clear. I wasn't arguing against it. I'm stating that you have all the businesses collecting that data. Why would a burger shop need that data? Or a malt shop or a specialty shop? The hook is what is drawing the tourism. That is where you are going to get your out-of-state license plates that will be used for data. The larger organization, I hate to mention a company, but XYZ is the hook. It's a $50 million development. Under New Star bonds, it's a $75 million development. There is $75 million of private money going into that development. So you now have a higher threshold for that hook itself, whether it be the motor speedway. We've got the motor speedway there. Why would we want to capture the data from the gas station on the corner and put that additional burden on a smaller business when the reason why they're there is because of the hook? So those that have the biggest investment should be gathering that data, not the, I don't want to call them the smaller players, but I don't want to see us, I would caution us about over-regulating the small entities that the ancillary development comes from, a larger development. I'm all for gathering every bit of data we can. I think it's extremely important. But I just worry about how burdensome it might be for the smaller business owner that wants to be part of that in a community. And I'll share with you why I think that way. When we passed the Kansas Motor Speedway bill, the additional 400 acres was to be all in one big package. We chose to separate it out so that the local community could design that district and allow some of the smaller businesses within our community and those that wanted to be part of that project have that authority to do that. And if it allowed us to put a plethora of different types of development around the hook. And so the data came from the hook, any data that was collected from out of state. And all you have to do is, they've got equipment now on our law enforcement community uses it. They can run your license plate and goes right into a database. And actually, a business could do that in a parking lot, but I'm afraid that some of us might think it'd be an invasion of privacy to have a photograph of your license plate as you enter one of our star bond districts. But there's opportunity there. I just worry about having the additional cost of small business providers and small business owners with ensuring that all have to do it.
So
may I rebut that for just a minute? I think that also that hook and how successful that hook is, quite frankly, would spur more development around it, and even quicker if they had the data that showed how big that hook was and how good that hook was or that area. So that would be another tool for small businesses to invest in because of the traffic. So it works both ways. Thank you.
So seeing no other questions, do I have a second on that amendment? Representative Croft. I would just say that I, for one, would want to collect the data on all the businesses that are paying for the star bonds because we're looking for cannibalization. We keep hearing these star bonds. I mean, these restaurants and businesses compete against restaurants and businesses across the street that aren't in the star bond districts, and we want to make sure that these star bonds are mostly paid for by people that come in from out of town. And when you draw a district around a Walmart or around a restaurant, and you're going to use those dollars to pay for the project, rather than allow the state and the locals to collect the sales tax, we want to know how much sales tax it's costing us. And that's just my 2 cents worth. Representative, you can close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee. I close.
Committee, you've heard the motion, second by Representative Croft. All in favor say aye. All against say no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Motion passes. I have a cleanup amendment. It's under our water in that same email. Okay, it's on page 12, and when it said that we made the change from once you establish the baseline of the sales taxes on a current business when it's drawn into a star bond district, we made a change from 100% to 90%. When we did that, though, it wasn't really clear that it was 90% of the excess of tax revenue, and so that's just a technical cleanup on that to make sure that it's clear that the baseline is established and 90% of anything extra collected on a star bond is used. Seconded by Representative Long. Is there any discussion or questions on that? Representative Burrows. Okay, so the amendment is to be clear that the 90% that is going to the star bond is in excess of the current taxes being collected. Seeing no further questions, I'll go ahead and close on the amendment. You've heard the motion, seconded by Representative Long. All in favor, say aye. All against, say no. Okay, so any other amendments? A motion passes. Any other amendments? Representative Curtis, did you have a second amendment that you wanted to bring? No. Any other amendments or discussion? Representative Burrows.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I'm trying to keep accurate notes, and just for the committee's review, this is part of the original star bonds legislation that came out with amendments from the last revision in 2003, and I read through most of them today, and they're not a whole lot different than what we actually have been discussing today. So I would like to make a few comments, if I may, Mr. Chairman. You've all been so patient and concerning a reference to how we spend taxpayer dollars on development projects. I would like to respond to the individual that talked about Wyandotte County having so many star bonds projects. We were the first star bonds project to utilize the star bonds policy in Wyandotte County, and it was a success, not only in the fact that it paid off early, but in the jobs, but also just the economic and reputation of the local metropolitan area for Wyandotte County. As I stated early on in my testimony, that we went from being a social dumping ground to being a major player with economic prosperity within the community. From that, just the last 10 years, we've seen a population growth of 8,000 people. Now, that may not sound like a lot to those in other areas of the state, but that's a tremendous amount of growth for our community. We had a major exodus. And Star Bonds is responsible for part of that. And I'm very, very pleased to see that as the legislator from Wyandotte County, I do have the scope statement that was requested by myself after there was accusations that there was wrongdoing or suspicious of wrongdoing in reference to how Star Bonds was utilized in Wyandotte County. And I encouraged you all to read the legislative post audit that was conducted back in early 2000. So the reference to the impact that the machinery and equipment had on all the communities, I can tell you in Wyandotte County, it was a $16 million hit to us in 1 year. And the Siegfried slider that some of you may not understand what that is, was named after, I believe, the majority leader at the time, who committed to sending back 90% of those tax dollars from the machinery and equipment back to local communities on a sliding scale, so it wouldn't be a taking all at one time. Well, it lasted, I don't even think, the full year. We didn't receive our first share, and then they eliminated that. So it was a $16 million impact in 1 year for Wyandotte County. And then the second part, and you've heard me state this, that the ad valorem, that the partnership that we had with local municipalities, that we have broke that promise and commitment to them to the tune of over $2 billion that had come out of our communities that stayed within the state to help us with our budget. So I just wanted to address those as to the success Star Bonds have had. Don't criticize communities that have tried to utilize this tool for the proper meeting. You heard me state early on, we want the criteria of star bonds to be met by the developers, not to have star bonds meet the criteria of the development. That's the difference, and it's a significant difference. I'm comfortable with the Dodson Amendment. It is Manhattan specific, and I can't blame anyone for advocating for their community. I do hope that the development that they are proposing is a successful development. The Highland Amendment on the corporations, I believe that's just standard stuff that we can utilize to continue to look at how our corporate offices are benefiting from star bonds. The transparency amendments, I don't believe are unwarranted. I think they've already been addressed. Every time we come back and revisit star bonds, we put more criteria into what we request as far as information. I believe that shows that we are always looking at how those tax dollars are being spent. I would ask that when this comes to the floor, that if there's any amendments that may knock this off the rails, please come see those of us that have some experience and knowledge about star bonds. Do not, and I would caution us, contrary to how you all may feel about star bonds, once the star bonds opportunity is gone or diminished to the point that it's not effective, we've lost a major economic tool in developments for communities all across the state. And it's not just state tax dollars that are going into these projects, it's private investment also. And that private investment wouldn't happen without the partnership of star bonds. And so I would just, with that, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that if there's anything that I can offer, I'm willing to stand for any questions and reference, but I do believe that the amendments are satisfactory. I don't think they're onerous at all. I would just caution us on being over regulatory heavy in reference to some of the small businesses, that the committee has made the decision to do just that. We'll get the data as necessary and determine what warrants star bond as we move forward with major developments in the state of Kansas.
Thank you for that, sir. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move that we pass out favorably SB 124 as amended.
I forgot who seconded this bill.
Chairman?
Sorry, Representative Highland did, right? Yeah, okay. You're not forgetful,
Chairman?
I promise.
Chairman?
Yes.
Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to see if you wish to consider passing it out as a substitute bill, just the reference for your consideration.
Yeah, I think that would be best. And then also we want to authorize any technical changes that need to be done.
Okay. I'll just change my motion for a substitute bill for Senate Bill 124.
Technical changes. In technical changes.
And technical changes.
Okay. Seconded by Representative Highland. Committee, you've heard the motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say no. Motion passes. Okay, committee, that took longer than anticipated, so we will have to come back tomorrow. We have a couple of things to wrap up tomorrow. Sorry for that, but hopefully we'll be quick tomorrow. We're adjourned.